Hi, welcome to the AR Emerging Architecture Awards Live. My name's Eleanor Beaumont and I'm Deputy Editor at the Architectural Review. I'll start with just a little bit of housekeeping. A quick note to the audience, if you'd please mute yourselves. There will be an opportunity for questions in the second half, but it would be great if you're able to mute yourselves to avoid interruptions. Panelists, please also keep yourselves muted, except when you're speaking. That's just to make sure there's no kind of annoying background noise, phones going off, that kind of thing. If you feel comfortable to do so, we would encourage you to switch your cameras on just so that you can see all your faces, it gives the impression of being in a room together, even though we sadly are not. Well, I say sadly, but actually we're excited to be together across borders and time zones to celebrate those at the beginning of their career in architecture, and in particular, the practices shortlisted for the AR Emerging Architecture Awards. As part of these celebrations, we've brought these brilliant architects together in conversations to discuss what it means to start a career in architecture in different parts of the world, the challenges you face, and how you overcome them. Together, this series of conversations will form an Emerging Architects Guide, a collection of advice and experiences and stories for new architects and students all over the world. In this conversation, I'm delighted to introduce Atelier Tao C, Khadka Eriksson Furunes, STPMJ, Studio Advaita, and Suzuko Yamada architects. And to kick off, we asked each practice to prepare a 3-point Emerging Architects Guide, answering 3 questions. Number 1, what advice would you give yourself as an architecture student that you weren't told then, but you know now? Second, what is an important lesson you've learned about being an emerging architect, specifically where you are in the world? And thirdly, what's the best piece of advice you've been told and by whom? We'll ask them to present these shortly, and then we'll then share our stories and anecdotes, ask each other questions and advice, not quite therapy, but perhaps somewhere in between. Pop any questions you might have for the architects in the chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll invite you to ask them after presentations. You can either ask them vocally or we'll read them out, whichever you prefer. So we're going to start with the great advice from our panelists. Panelists, we've collected your pictures into slides so that when you see your practice name on the screen, please unmute yourself, crucially. Also introduce yourself. It'd be lovely to just introduce your names and your practice, and then present each of your 3 pieces of advice with each picture. I'll be changing the slides. I'll try and kind of guess when you're changing to your next piece of advice. You know, feel free to say change a slide if I'm a bit slow. This is quick fire, so it's kind of a minute per slide. You know, keeping it snappy, just so that the crucial advice that you'd give any emerging architect. So first up is Atelier Tao C. So please unmute yourself and introduce yourselves and your advice.
Hello, I'm Chunyan Cai of Atelier Tao C. Hello from Shanghai. Yes, that's it. What should I do next? Okay, so the first question is about what advice I will give to myself when I was a student. I choose this image. Is an image that I did in undergraduate school, but I didn't dare to develop this option, and because I doesn't feel like I can develop it into a project. But after many years, when I saw this image again, I realized I like the image very much, and I feel like it's very related to the project I'm running now. So the advice I will give to myself is just choose the difficult option to develop and never afraid to be failed. Because actually the school, the university is the last safe place to do risky works, because it's you are always being protected. So that's the advice I'm giving for myself, the first question. And then the second question is, what is an important lesson you have learned about being emerging architects, especially when you are in the world where I am? I think because China has been considered as a huge experimental field for star architects for the last 20 years. The most rapid the projects would be appreciated, but it's not the case for young architects, I think. So for young architects, the most crucial thing is get your project built, not only stay on the paper or in the computer. So for me, in order to have my project to be well executed or to be built, actually we would better to consider all the conditions like location, the budget, the craftsmanship, and the builder skill in different area, and actually we will make the project the option that being very safe, that we can convince the client to build it, to convince the builder willing to build it. So and also we design the projects that according to the I think it's very special in China, because the rural area and the urban area, the builder skill is so different. It's not like in Japan or in Switzerland, the builder skill always being very precise and very accurate. So when we build project in rural area, the project, the detail and the dimension will be like, we will design very loose dimensions, very easy being built, and only controls some like very small dimensions. And that's the lesson I learned, like how we make our project to be executed. We should do not according to the client's demand, also need to consider the technical problem we are facing. And also what's the best piece of advice you've been told and by whom? It's actually a difficult question for me. I didn't know what to answer. And then when I thinking about this question, I was like randomly draw on the paper. So the image is what when I thinking of these questions. So, and I think remember the words Renzo Piano said in his praise speech. It's like about the darkness and the contradiction we always facing when we are doing our projects. So it's quite also related to the image as well. So I would say like all the art, there are difficult moments. Creating means grappling in the dark. So and it's actually such. That's the word he's giving us. And when the first time I saw it, I think it confronted me a lot, because I was very painful when I when I'm designing, and I feel like the darkness I'm staying in the darkness. But when I read his speech, I realize all the architects will stay in the darkness and find a way out, and make me very comfortable. And I have the faith to go on, and that's it. Thank you.
Right, we're here. Hello, hello from Venice. I'm Sudar, and this is Alex, and we run a shared practice. We're based in the Philippines and in Norway, and we practice around the region as well as internationally as well.
Yeah, so our advice was, that not knowing it can be a good thing. It's a space to learn, because a lot of what we were doing when we were studying, students were stuff that we couldn't necessarily relate to. So it didn't relate to the way that we lived our own lives. So we were kind of told from a different perspective, like a different world than the one that we were living in.
So we would have advised ourselves to start with, what is around us, to situate our knowledge with our own experiences first, and rather than to be, part of something that we don't fully understand.
So similarly, as architects, we can also open our process to others, so that they also can be part of learning from their own situation and give shape to something that that can represent them also. And the next one would be.
So there's the next thing that we would like to say is like there's not really only just one way to practice architecture. So we can find a space within our profession that is rooted in a way of life that is unique to our understanding of the world. And yet beyond this rootedness within our own context, what we find really beautiful is that there are connections across cultures and many traditions that exist in the way that we have lived together.
So one such way of life is through mutual support. And these are existing structures that show us alternative forms of living, building and working together that can inform how we can practice architecture.
And the essence of architecture is really not the space, but the meanings that we ascribe to space. And the way these meanings are generated is at once both political and aesthetic. So for space exists intrinsically, but it only becomes architecture when we give it meaning.
So the best advice we got, that's
next slide.
It's not really what you do, but how you do it. So it's a piece of advice that we got from our mentor, Housekeeping. It describes architecture not only as an end product, but also as a process.
So we believe that we make the way that we make architecture shapes the way it's understood and also the way it's used. So our process has been about exploring how we can work together with people to create something that represents us as a collective.
And mutual support offers like an alternative way of building, rooted in solidarity, care, sympathy, empathy, and so on. So yeah, that's our.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mijong Lim, STPMJ from South Korea. Nice to see you guys. So the first question was about what advice would you give yourself as an architecture student? We talked about that now, that basically travel a lot and have a curiosity on what happens around you. That's the advice that I would like to give. Through traveling, you can see a lot of like new things as we did, and also having a lot of experience from other countries too, and not even other countries, that you can see a lot of new things and open up the new ideas or new views, visions to the fresh eyes. And there is not certain things that is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. So with lots of the curiosity, you can see lots of phenomena or a lot of the constraints that that works in cause the result. So that's something they would like to give as advice. And next, the important lesson that we have learned about being architects, specifically where we are. The career in architecture in Korea goes really, really fast. Here, the architecture industry is really fast. And since we have experience in New York and America, that this comparison that actually hits us a lot. So we had a lot of chance that we can finish a lot of works in a short period, and at the same time we had to learn and develop ourselves how to quickly make the decisions which will not like make us regret. So think a lot and go fast. So that's how we how I learn in this condition. And next, oh yes, the best piece of advice you have been told, and by whom? The advice was the doubt and double check everything you draw. So as if you make everything can be wrong. So that kind of helps us make sure that everything is right, and like trying to make any silly mistakes. And that was from one of my colleagues. Thank you.
Do we have Studio Advaita in the room, in the virtual room?
We could see them before. Now their camera is off. Ah.
They have just left the room.
They've just left the room. Fantastic.
Okay, let's
Great.
skip these slides.
So we'll go back to these. Suzuko Yamada.
Yes, here. Okay, it's my turn. So the first question, what advice would you give yourself as an architecture student that you weren't taught them, but now not? What I have come to understand since I started practicing is that architecture design cannot be done alone. I now believe that it is through dialogue with someone else that a space is created in which a fertile architecture experience occurs. So this may be because most architecture is not meant for one person in the first place. And so now we're 5 members in my office, including me, and we talk a lot during the designing process and using this kind of physical model. And even we talk about something very different from architecture, like what we see in gallery or recently, or what we found in the street and what we eat. So it's really everything. So such a trivial thing can suddenly become a very important architecture concept. So for the second question, so COVID-19 has turned everyday life around the world into something extraordinary. And it was then that I realized how much I had believed in the everyday. I felt that it was absurd and even dangerous to think of architecture only in terms of what we see and what we know, or the values we take for granted and the society we live in. And for the third question, what's the best piece of advice you have been told and by whom? So this is Su Fujimoto. When I was working at Su Fujimoto office, he always asked me the question, is that opening up the future of architecture? So this is his question. And these words are still very important to me now that I have started designing my own projects. In fact, this kind of thing is necessary even if you are not an architecture maybe in art and in design. So it's not just about fulfilling the immediate goal, but also about looking a little farther into the future and constantly thinking about what architecture can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if we have Studio Advaita back in the room, and if not, we can perhaps go back to their slides if they're back.
Yeah, hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, this is Rasika.
Sorry for interruption.
Yeah,
That's all right.
The light failure, so
The current is
has gone. So sorry.
No problem at all.
Yeah. So myself, Rasika, is Prasad. We are from Studio Advaita, from India. So I will just start with the first question. What advice would you give yourself as an architecture student that you were not told then but know now? So we must dare to explore into the unknown. This is the most important thing, I guess, to prepare ourselves for seeing the unseen. Through this process, we built up a plethora of experiences, investigations, and anxieties, which transform to a new meaning and new aesthetic notions. It's like a journey to discover, and that discovery is very important to find out a new space for the world we live in. So in this process, the very important thing we feel is we must be consistent till end. And I will just share this is an example. It's a photograph of an installation called Descent into the Limbo by Anish Kapoor. He has done at Havana. It's a dark interior valley, or apart from its object, maybe it could be our own interior space beyond our physical body, which has a tremendous infinite quality to explore. So maybe even now, while providing the solutions to the future cities, we feel we should take a pause for some time and ask some fundamental questions to ourselves for our existence and being. That's the advice we would like to give for ourselves. So.
Hello. The second one, you have what is an important lesson you have learned about being an emerging architect, especially where you are in the world. We are living in India. It's a constant uncertainties rooted in the Indian culture. So we have disparity, languages, differences, and different regions. A multicultural context with multifaceted views towards the life always derives the complexities, which allows freedom in the various design possibilities that we feel. With multidisciplinary learning, we can extend our mental boundaries and consequently afford a richer interpretation of life complexities. So we feel we must try to develop the process of observing the world holistically rather than seeing through the individualist perspective. Through this, we find the basic idea and concept can be derived from everyday life and object.
Yeah, and the last question, it's what's the best piece of advice you have been told and by whom? We feel it's by Bernard Schumi, quoted in 2012 in Y Concept article. He said, in the history of world cultures, the word architecture is usually associated with the buildings of great beauty or magnitude. Architecture is often presented as a mere knowledge of form. Yet it could be argued that architecture is first and foremost a form of knowledge. Much like mathematics, philosophy, or art, One of its most important functions is to generate ideas and concepts about the world we live in. Architecture allows us to apprehend that world, and it is equally about asking questions and providing answers to the problem of use or a social equity. We feel all of us are here for developing the concept about life through the medium of architecture, I guess. And one more quote I like to conclude, because just last week we have visited Ahmedabad and we have seen Gandhi Ashram designed by Charles Correa. And there we found this beautiful quote by M.K. Gandhi, written in 1921, exactly just 100 years back. So it's very beautiful. He said, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any." M.K. Gandhi. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Oh, no, wrong. Great. Well, some amazing advice. I think not just for architects, but actually for kind of anybody really. My favorite was, it's not what you do, but how you do it. It feels like a kind of mantra for life, really. So audience, everyone actually, if you'd like to put your screen on gallery view, if you're not already, so this is in the top right-hand corner. This is just so that you can see everybody rather than just my face. Panelists, the 5 panelists, if you're in fairly quiet surroundings, I wonder whether you'd like to unmute yourself. This is just so that we can attempt to have a kind of natural conversation, a fairly kind of flowing conversation rather than a kind of stop-start. We'll see if we can avoid speaking over each other. I think it's perhaps just a little bit less stilted than having to, like, you know, the constant "you're on mute" comment. And I think before we start, I just also want to ask the panelists, if you have any questions for the other architects, please do feel free to ask them. Just keep them in mind if there's anything that kind of piqued your interest during those presentations. So to start off, I was really struck in all of your advice. There were some recurring themes. And the first one that I noticed was the importance of collaboration. There was a mention of kind of mutual support, the fact that architecture cannot be done alone. I wondered if any of you had a recent kind of experience, a recent story where this idea of collaborating with others really kind of got you out of a hole, really kind of unlocked something, the power of working together that allowed you to overcome a challenge. Who'd like to come in? You're all muted, so I mean.
It's me unmuted.
We can start. We can share an experience. I think Alex and I recently finished a project in the Philippines where we were designing something with the community as well. And the idea there that we were trying to kind of resolve an issue about how we site the buildings properly. And throughout this period, I think Alex and I were really struggling to kind of resolve all the site issues and trying to find out how we could really decide this thing together. And at a certain point, Alex and I had like an idea of where we thought it would be nice to site it, like from an architectural perspective, from what we've known. But through the process of doing the workshops with the community, what we realized is that, the concepts that we were holding as valuable were not the same as what the community thought was meaningful or valuable. And so in that sense, when we had the discussions, the community was able to present their ideas and present the concepts that they thought were meaningful for us to pursue. And then effectively they changed our mind, that they showed us that we were wrong effectively with our assumptions, and sort of the assumptions that they made or the concepts that they were pursuing were actually more meaningful or more valuable than what we could have thought. Actually,
they made a better decision.
They made a better decision than we did. So, I mean, that's I think an important thing to understand always, that, there's always space for different forms of knowledge and and other values that should be part of the process as well.
That's a contribution. but I mean, also the pandemics, I think on our end, like how the pandemics has kind of paused everything, and we were working, we're in Venice right now, dismounting the Biennale contribution we had, and you know, normally the Biennale is a bit competitive between national pavilions. There's a lot of competition about who's going to be better than the other, and there's a lot of these kind of things. But in this Biennale, a lot of the national pavilions collaborated in terms of contributing with you know, information, logistics. We opened doors for each other. You know, there was a lot of really fantastic contributions that made it possible. So for those that did get to come to see the Biennale, it's a very different one this year because it's really rooted in mutual support and help, you know. So I think we need it now because there's so much happening around the world, and to get through these things, we really need to help each other. So yeah,
I think it's a really good point. I wonder, Suzuko, you kind of mentioned this idea that architecture can't be done alone. I wondered if there's kind of a particular project or a particular moment that comes to mind where you really thought this can't be done alone, and who was around you to kind of that you worked with.
Sorry, so the question is like
it's about collaboration, about working together, the importance of working together. You said that architecture can't be done alone, and I wondered if there was a particular kind of story that you had that perhaps you know, there was a particular challenge that working with other people really helped.
Yes, thank you. So firstly, structure designer, we are already working with. So Advaita 2019 is very challenging project in terms of structure and how to construct the kind of wood. We have so many diagonal wood structure in it. So we discussed with the structure engineers a lot. So then also constructor, so the builder, also the carpenters. So we started the construction, but still we keep discussing how to connect and how to organize all the wood structure stuff, and also like the timbers and staircases and all the stuff, how to make it, how to make like organization. So yeah, like those engineers and construction staff is very important to us.
Anybody else got any anecdotes for where a structural engineer really got them out of a tight spot? I just think it's interesting because I think as when you're beginning in any kind of career, I feel like there is, I suppose that it's been mentioned about the idea of star architecture and the kind of one name, you know, the authorship of one name. And I wonder, yeah, just if anyone else has some strong feelings about actually how many hands do make a building, particularly as kind of emerging architects. I mean, even if I can see other people from the I just wonder if anyone had any thoughts on that. Don't be shy. Fine. Well, I've got another question, which was, I mean, we spoke a little bit about architecture school and the role of architecture school in preparing us for the world of architecture, whether it does or not, and as a place where we can take risks, a place to kind of be daring, but also as a place that didn't necessarily relate to the world that we knew. So I wonder what people's experience of architecture school was. I know some people went to school in different places to where they practice, whether there's this kind of active kind of translation perhaps between places, whether architecture school was a place to grow or perhaps not. Chunyan, you spoke particularly about the architecture school as a place to take risks. I wonder what risks did you take at architecture school?
Hi. Yeah, I think it's actually I studied furniture and interior design when I was in my undergraduate school. And then I worked for like 5 years, and then I realized I wanted to do architects. So I went to Blah to study my postgraduate degree. And then it's very interesting because Blah is quite open, and we can have all kinds of topics as my thesis projects. But the interesting part is when I open my graduate thesis project topic, and I failed because I brought the topic like how furniture can take place a role of architecture, such kind of topic, and I remember I failed at the beginning. That means I cannot go on on my thesis projects. But so I have to I have a summer to develop it and represent in order to have the kickoff going on. So it's a very interesting experience because it's the first time I take a risk at the school, but then I realized the risk pushed me a lot. I learned a lot when I was failed. I learned more when I failed than I got a good score, like make the project going very smoothly. So that's the experience I have during my school. And I realized like even I was failed at the beginning, I can always, because school always will help you, and all the tutors will support you to make the project go on to the right direction. So, but when you graduate, when I have my practice and I'm doing the real projects, real life project, the risk will take a lot of more price. So I realized like take risk at school is a good experience. Yeah, that's it.
I wondered, Mijun, I know that you studied in the US, but kind of practice in South Korea and in Seoul. I wonder what you gained from studying somewhere different to where you now kind of you now practice, and what you think that that offered you kind of in your kind of career.
Yeah, I kind of assumed that this might be the question for me too. Yeah, so I went to school in Korea, and I had my major was in Korea. Major was housing and interior design, but more like focusing on the housing. So it was more like how to design the residential, a lot of residential programs. So more focusing on like how to design the flats and like big complex. And as you might see a lot of pictures of Korea, there are lots of like apartments and flats. And after that, I studied in US. I did undergrad again at RISD, Roland School of Design, as our architecture degree. And after that, I went to GSD with my master. It was a very different, I mean, both school has different comparing to Korea's education. Recently, the Rhode Island School of Design was more like focusing on how to like assemble the elements and focusing on that on like tectonics. So how to make the things in the hands. And at GSD was kind of opening a lot of like a cultural new things and see a lot of like what's going on in new architecture. And to me, the education in US is more like thinking logically and open up the new like ideas and how to make the consistent or integrated things instead of I guess the education in Korea was more like focusing on how to satisfying the functions or like the technical stuff. So there was a different, for me, it was a huge difference. And in terms of the practice, I had an experience in New York for 6 years, and then now in Korea 6 years. Comparing to both, as I said, it's very fast here. But what I feel is like nowadays in Korea, a lot of new architects, I guess the young architects, like my generation, they had a lot of experience in other countries, like and in terms of education or practice. So somehow I see a lot of things in conditions being changed in Korea, but for example, like a long time ago in Korea, like architect is more like a technician here. But recently, nowadays, the people kind of notice that architect as a profession and something that you can make their place or their space much better than before, and kind of respect the way we are working. So that kind of changed the environment to what we are working right now compared to, let's say, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah, so it's very interesting because I suppose everyone's architecture careers, I suppose, starts at architecture school, and it's interesting the idea that perhaps it wasn't the place that was best prepared people. Another theme that I think recurred in your advice was this idea of embracing doubt, embracing failure, uncertainty. And I wondered, Rasika and Prasad, I wondered if there was a moment where you thought perhaps, I mean, I suppose particularly during the time of the pandemic, where uncertainty perhaps unlocked something, or something had an unlikely outcome and perhaps kind of turned out for the better.
So yes. Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. We are since we have actually I've worked with the Pritzker winner, Pritzker laureate architect Tushi, and Rasika worked with the Sen Kapadia architect for a long time, who worked with the Louis Icahn in Philadelphia. After traveling the entire India, so it's like in Indian context, it's very diverse. Like from the east, west, north, and east, it's completely different. There is a lot of language differences. Even the food culture everything is different. So we got a first project in 2013 in the east part of India. It's in Assam. So it's very we want to build one school, and first in our first visit, in our first visit, we started making a drawings what we have teachers in our
in the schools.
We
have prepared all the drawings as per how the academically we make. So after going there, that was actually the very like risk or the challenge to go and work in the Northeast India, like it's like 7 to 8 years before. And while going there, we found that those people are very much superimposed with the ideas of
urban. So they are very much influenced on the urban cities. So that's the bigger challenge about how to learn about their own heritage, own local indigenous culture and this material. So it's we found very difficult to convince them about their own culture. That is one thing what we learn in our first the project.
Even we started developing the drawings also as per the drawings they used to do. So we derived the different system of making the drawings for them, and slowly the school.
Like we used to show them the plan, sections, and elevation, 3 different entities. But they used to understand these 3 entities is not a 3 different entities. They understand this is all is in one. So when we draw plan, section, in elevation in a one drawing, it's superimposed in a one plan. So they understand better rather than 3 different.
It's like a old Indian miniature
paintings. So as and in this pandemic, of course, all of due to this in our profession in architecture, there is a lot of effect in urban as well as in rural areas. A lot of migration happened in the back in cities area. After the pandemic, it's coming. A lot of laborers and the skilled laborers are migrating towards the cities. And earlier it was a picture like that. No, it's now the cities is not working well, and now we should move towards the rural area. That was a scenario in a pandemic, but after the pandemic, right now it's becoming it's normalizing everything. So it's slowly getting everyone is again moving towards the city.
But the good thing in the pandemic, we think we have used the technology, and it was a very good accessibility through Zoom and all. So I think the cross pollination happened, and it leads to the blurring the boundaries. It has helped, I guess. That was a good thing happened in the pandemic. So.
One of the few good things. Just a reminder, if anyone has got any questions for any of the architects, please do put them in the chat, and we can then we'll then be able to unmute you, and you can ask your question in person. I think it's kind of come out through some of your answers, the importance of travel and I suppose working in different places to where you studied or to where you're based. Alex and Sudha, I wondered if there was I think particularly over the last year or so, as we know, these awards have been delayed by the pandemic. We published your work a year ago now, and you were shortlisted before that and entered these awards even before that. I wondered whether that kind of idea of working across cultures has changed, whether there's what has perhaps been the challenges when you're working kind of across countries and across borders.
Yeah. I mean, a premise for the work that we do through mutual support is that you work face to face. You work physically together and spend time together, us and the communities we work with. So that has just been absolutely impossible with the COVID, and it has put a lot of our projects on pause. On the other hand, I think the other side of that coin was the collaboration we had here in Venice with the Biennale, with the different national pavilion, which started digitally, but became physically when we all came here to install. So there's this like this double, I mean, this is the issue maybe with the digital representation, is that it's accessible for some, and it makes possible exchange for some, but it doesn't do that for everyone. So it changes the kind of hierarchy or the access to the discourse which happens. But I mean, that kind of collaboration we've had here in Venice with the other national pavilion has been absolutely fantastic. It has given so much, both in terms of the themes, the architecture, and the discourses that we're part of, but also kind of how we kind of build on each other and support each other in difficult times. You know, so I think there's this good and bad side to this aspect. You want to add something?
Yeah, I think like Alex was saying, you know, the connections that we've made, like that are digital first, became very real also upon like being able to meet with people. So it's not a replacement for the physical face-to-face working, but it does help us sort of create different connections also across time and space, which we found as very rich and equally rewarding as well. So maybe this pandemic has opened up these new channels, like particularly being able to participate in events around the world such as this.
Yeah.
All of these are highly enriching for all of us. But of course, you know, we miss the drinking together, the parties, and all of these things which do happen after these formal sort of events. And I think that's what we find is also equally rich. And I think now it's slowly getting back to this condition. So hopefully, you know, we could continue with these other things as well, other modes of collaboration and communication.
It's also interesting, the time aspect and how this has been going over a longer period of time than it normally does, and how that also affects, particularly when we talk about emerging, because then we've been emerging for some time. So, you know, what does that do in terms of how we understand architecture? And also a little bit interesting for architects, which actually we do spend a lot of time building stuff. It takes years sometimes. So this is maybe a much more realistic duration for a discussion like this, no? Yeah.
There's a slowness to it, which it's not quite, it's like, I wonder, Suzuko, you mentioned the pandemic kind of revealing new kind of aspects of kind of working in architecture to you. I wondered if there was, I mean, we're talking about these awards kind of going on for slightly extended period. I wonder if what you might have learned since perhaps we published your work, since the pandemic has kind of taken hold. How's that affected kind of your practice where you are?
Well, like from the last year, just started the COVID-19, and I moved my studio from my house to the outside of my house, since we don't have the strict lockdown thing in Japan. We're just we need to stay. We had to stay home, but it was not that strict. So I actually I kept in our office is doing the architecture and working together face to face. We kept that kind of style. So I don't know. I was just like feeling that, but I couldn't go to overseas, of course, and so I faced to my daily life very I say so that's the reason that I was I say that I was very I thought it was dangerous that to think of architecture like only in terms of what we see. So how do you say, so we tried in my studio, we tried not to see the daily life in Tokyo, but we researched a lot of things we are which is not it's not the things not the surrounding thing. So yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's been a strange time of like introspection, hasn't it? We're very quickly running out of time. I just wanted to double check that our loyal partner VMzinc, Jonathan Lowy, doesn't have any questions for the audience, seeing as he's been uncharacteristically quiet in this session.
He's just popped one in for you.
Oh, has he? Fantastic. Well, just on cue. That's brilliant. Jonathan, would you like to ask your question?
I think we've hello everybody. I think we've sort of touched on it. A few people have talked about the need to interact culturally, face to face, and so on and so forth. But for the vast majority of the world's population, in some way, cultural exchanges have been sort of bigger in some way because they've been able to view what's happened around the world. They couldn't do it before because they couldn't afford to travel. The people that are missing traveling are the people that could travel, and I was in that fortunate position and I'm missing traveling. But how's that going to affect architects, certainly younger architects who might think differently about traveling in the future, face-to-face traveling, either for pandemic reasons or maybe for global warming reasons? So it's sort of quite an enormous and general question, but because it's been touched on so many times, I thought I'd ask it.
It's a great question. Perhaps Alex and Sudha, you can take this one, seeing as you are actually in Venice, which which means you have travelled to be there.
Yes, and actually that should be said. The Biennale has more visitors now than previous architecture biennales during the pandemic, which is interesting. You know, there's been more physical visitors than previously. But I mean, I think culture has to travel. Culture has to. We have to meet. We have to meet face to face. At the same time, it's also nice how it does give access. You know, in terms of people that are not able to. I mean, even in terms of, I think quite a lot of Filipino architects are now engaged in different awards and ceremonies. Is fantastic, really reaching out, being part of the discourses. And
yeah, in a way, yeah, I'd like to speak also from the context of the Philippines, and particularly in our case, you know, we've sort of been excluded from much of the architecture discourse, even in Southeast Asia and globally, for many reasons, I think. But one of it is primarily to do with possibly the difficulty of traveling to the Philippines. Like, it's not as convenient, it's not near a hub somehow. And so, like, if there is an architecture festival in Singapore, let's say like World Architecture Festival or these things, a lot of architects like would make the journey there and sort of participate and do the lectures and have access to that in that sense. But in the Philippines, like, it's one more stop. So if we were to invite like some well-known architects to speak at conferences in the Philippines, like, they sort of feel like it's too much of a hassle to fly one more stop to the Philippines. And so kind of the kinds of architects that we are able to invite are maybe mostly from our own region as well only. And so it does cut off a lot of the access to that sources of knowledge. But with the prevalence of Zoom and more people being able to participate that way, I think it opens up a whole new world of access to kind of resources and information and knowledge from around the world for us.
Yeah.
Fantastic answer. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you short because we are now actually over time. I think this conversation will continue, you'll be pleased to know, with the rest of the shortlisted architects. First of all, congratulations to everyone for being shortlisted. Well done. Thanks to our partners, VMzinc and Scale Careers, to you, the audience, for listening. Up next, the shortlisted architects will be sharing their short insights into their practices, including these 5, and we'll be revealing the winners of the Emerging Architecture Awards. So stay where you are. And we'll also have 2 further instalments of the Emerging Architects Guide at 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. GMT. But this is all from me. Thanks very much. Thanks very much to our panel. Stay tuned.
Thank you.